Hello, welcome back to my guitar lesson. Today we're going to look at Eric Clapton's part on Yard Blues, performed at the Rock and Roll Circus in 1968, hosted by the great Rolling Stones. This lesson was requested by many of you in the comments. I'm so sorry that it took me a long time to get around to it, but now it's finally here. So without further ado, let's get started. The first verse. Eric starts playing his intro fill on the fourth bar of John's count in, synchronized with the second and the third beat of that bar. So have a look. 2, 3, 4. Eric then starts playing the E chord at the lower position, kicking off the very first verse of that tune. Now you bend the low G note followed by an open E note, and then you quickly strum the E chord. Now you're going to play this lick that is quite common amongst the Chicago blues players, and Eric, he loves this lick. Again, you bend the low G note, it's the same line as before. Now you move up to the higher position and play this. I first play it at the normal speed and then I play it slower. All of this so far is based on the E minor pentatonic scale. Now you move on to the A chord. With the low A note is still ringing out, you move up again to the higher position and play this lick. So you start this off by bending the high A note. While you're bending it, you play the first and the second strings at the 12th fret. Some people only play one string in doing this, but then it won't sound as aggressive as it should. So please make sure you play these two strings. Now the next line involves picking the two notes in a row, the high A note and the high G note. But keep in mind this has to be done by picking the string only once. So first of all, please have a look. Like that. So you bend it up, down, and then you swiftly bend the G note up without giving an additional pick. A tip to make it sound like Eric Clapton is you trying to make it as smooth as you can, making it almost sound like human voice. Now you play a similar sort of phrase with a slight variation at the end. Slide down the very last note. Now you move on to G to B 7 chord progression. In each verse, when it comes to that, you play exactly the same riff. So once you learned it note by note, you can recycle this riff, which is great. Now I'll play a bit slower, starting with the low G. Based around the B chord, you slide it up. So the last bit of that phrase, Eric doesn't pick every single note. You may pick these three notes like this, but the rest you gotta let it go with just sliding. And it's consistent throughout the song. Now you move back to the low E chord. Now you're going to play the turnaround, like this. So he starts this off with a classic Chuck Berry bending. As well as George Harrison, Eric loved Chuck Berry, who doesn't love Chuck Berry? And he keeps on recycling this lick. So once you learned it, it'll be useful later on this song. Notice here straight after the E note you hit the B note as it's a turnaround. Okay, that's it for the first verse. Second verse. The first couple of phrases are much the same as the ones in the first verse, so you do. The second one is this. Then you move on to the A chord. You play this. A slightly slower version. You continue playing around the A chord. As you move back to the E chord, instead of playing in the E minor pentatonic scale, you play this line in E major pentatonic scale for a quick change in the feel. You begin this line with bending the high F sharp note. You quickly play the next line in the E minor pentatonic scale at this position. Again, you play the same riff along the G to B7 chord progression, which I already explained. Back to the E chord. The turnaround is going to be different in each verse. This time around, you start off by bending the low A note. You bend it twice, followed by the low G sharp, quickly alternating between hammering on and pulling off. Now you play the open A note, followed by a few notes on B. Bend the low G, followed by an open E note. That's the end of the second verse. The third verse, which starts with 3 stabs, goes like this. Responding to the John's vocal line, "Mother was off the sky," you play the stab by playing the first and the second strings at the 12th fret and quickly sliding them down, followed by the open E note slightly muted by the palm of your hand. Now responding to the "Father was off the earth" line, you're going to play the same stab, but this time you're going to miss out the open E note. Now you do this. Very similar to, or maybe identical to, the lines previously played. Now he moves on to the A chord, playing this around the A chord. Since he knows that he's playing around the A chord, he reaches out to the higher position of the A pentatonic scale and plays this. Now he's back to E and plays this. Perfectly synchronized with John's fixed riff, which is very nice. And here is the next line. Once you bend the high A note, you hit the high E and B note at the same time, followed by the high D note and slide it down. Again, you play exactly the same riff along the G to B7 chord progression. The turnaround this time, you start off by bending the high A note with sustaining the high B note and bend that twice. Now you bend the high G and the high B notes with your index finger. After that, you're inclined to play the E note, but in fact, you skip that and hit the low B. Why you hit the B instead of E? It's because essentially you're turning around the dominant fifth, which is B's seventh chord. So you show that you're aware of that chord change. Again, resort back to the E chord, and that is the end of the third verse. The fourth verse. So the stabs are the same as before. Now at the end of the stabs, you bend the high D note, which is sustaining the high E note. Followed by this line. I'll play it slowly this time. High B and E together. D, A, G, E, and D. Now you move on to the A chord, and quickly you bend these two strings. High A and high C sharp, bend it twice. Once you get there, you bend the low A note. Whilst you're bending it, you hit the open E note on the first string. After that, you pull the third string down and you hit the low G sharp. The alteration of hammering on and pulling off. Now you play the open A note, followed by a few notes on B, back to the open A. Now then you move on to play the G to B7 transition riff, though only this time around, Eric starts playing the very first note of that riff, which is the low G note, with his middle finger. This doesn't cause a sonic difference, but this is just how he finds it comfortable playing. So let me show you this with a slower speed. Now usually at this point you go back to the original E7th chord. However, this time around you leave that out and move on to the turnaround lick. So let me show you this. Here, you are playing based around the E major pentatonic scale with a slight bending on the F sharp note. And you move on to the E7th chord with an additional A note. Like that. And that's the end of the fourth verse. The fifth verse. Here is a phrase at the end of the stops. Now this is based around an E minor pentatonic scale. Let me show you again with a slower speed. From this onwards, you play in a slightly different rhythm. You essentially play in a shuffle rhythm, and the chord has just transitioned to A. So this is the basic riff of this section. Now at the end of the first time around, you're going to deliberately play the syncopated hit. Moving on to the E chord, but you play exactly the same riff. In these next two sections along the G to B7th chord progression, you're going to play the individual fills instead of the fixed riff. First off, you play the G chord, and the notes you're going to play are on the G major pentatonic scale, followed by the B chord. At the very last pick of that B chord, it'll sound even better if you slide it down. For the turnaround, you play the classic Delta Blues rundown, like this. Then you move on to play the B7 chord. Instead of strumming the chord, Eric seemed to be playing more of an arpeggio line, going individually from the 5th to the 2nd strings, followed by just the 3rd and the 2nd strings with a quick alteration. That was the 5th verse. Now the 6th verse mainly involves the riff that we've already looked at. But there are other bits that are also different from any other verses, so have a look. Starting with the same riff in E, once you've done that 3 times, because you're making a transition into the A chord, you play this line. After you finish playing the riffs in E and the A chord, instead of going back to the E chord and play another set of the riffs, you actually go in and play the stabs in the Jimi Hendrix chord. If you look closely, Eric's hand looks much busier, but I can't play any faster than this anyway, so please let me know in a comment if you figured out how exactly you're supposed to play. Now you move on to the G chord, you play quick 3 stabs. Then you move on to the B chord, but once again you're going to play a quick run in the B major pentatonic scale. This turnaround is exactly the same as the round played in the previous verse. As you're going to play the B7 chord, Eric again plays a sort of arpeggio line, but the number of the notes picked is much less than the previous verse. The reason being you try to leave a plenty of space for the big solo to come, which marks the end of the 6th verse. Let's take a look at the first half of the solo. The first chunk goes like this. I'll play a bit slower. Now you're going to bend the high A and the high C sharp together, followed by these 2 lines. Now you're going to bend the high B note. So this guy on YouTube called Guitar Pilgrim, he explains this well, saying that by bending this note you show the awareness of that chord change. Because if you bend the B, then you hit the C sharp, which is a part of the A chord. But one thing he missed out is that you actually bend this note with your index finger. It might have been trivial to him, but if you want to do it exactly like Eric did, you gotta get it right. Now, this approach to the solo is also evident in Eric's other solos like Crossroads. So this particular bit is equivalent to the bended B note in Yard Blues. So you can see this might have been one of his go-for bends during the Cream time around 1968. So after that you do this. In bending these two notes, make sure you don't rush and you play with a style. Followed by that, you do this. Once you got there, you're going to slide it into the E7 chord at the higher position. Although, just before you reach there, you pass through these two notes, which are the high B and the C sharp. After you playing that 3 times, you finally reach at the E7 chord. Now, a tip to make it sound like a pro is to add quite a lot of vibrato to it. Let me give you a quick comparison of with and without the vibrato. So this was without the vibrato. That was with the vibrato. It makes quite a lot of difference in the sound, I think. Now you do this, followed by this bit of the line is based around the E major pentatonic scale. Quickly switch back to the E minor pentatonic scale. As you can see, Eric likes to mix these two together. After that you play the low E string open, then you hit the B note 4 times. So that's the first half of that solo section. Once again, I'll play the first half of that solo at the slower speed. Now the second half of that solo. One thing to note from this chunk is that the way Eric shows his awareness of the chord change is slightly different from the previous verse. After the series of that bending, Eric deliberately hit the A note, responding to the A note which the tune is currently in. Remember earlier, Eric approached this by bending the B note to hit the C sharp. Now we've learned 2 variations in different approaches to respond to the chord changes. This is what follows that line. Now let me take you through the second half of that solo at the slower speed. That is the end of the entire solo. Now once you complete the entire solo, the parts after that is going to be fairly straightforward. start this off by playing the E chord. Just like the earlier sections, you bend the low G, followed by the low E. So this line, you hammer on the low B, followed by the open D, and then E. Again, you repeat this line. After that, you play this. Moving on to the A chord, this is what you play on top. Now you're going to bend the high A and C sharp, followed by a quick bend on high G and B. That quick bend on G and B has to be cut off as soon as you do it. Followed by this line. As you move on to the G to B7's chord progression, instead of playing the same old riff on the G chord, Eric only strums it, just like playing a waltz. You're still going to play the same riff on the B7th. And that marks the end of Eric Clapton's part on Yard Blues. If you made it this far, you're as crazy as I am, so well done. And thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave any feedback or questions in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't. I will see you in the next video.